Cool. Well, thank you for all joining Kent Digital Meetup today. Welcome to our September meetup. We are talking about PR and campaigns today, and we have two great talks lined up for you on the screen. So the agenda for tonight is similar to normal. So what we'll do is, obviously we've had a little bit of an intro, we've all got to know each other a little bit better. I'm going to hand over to Kay in a second to give her talk. Then we'll have a short little break in between. Then we'll move on to Cath's talk. And then what we'll do is we'll have a joint Q&A session at the end of both talks, so we can get everyone involved in the conversation and go from there. So a little bit about Kay before I pass on. Some of you would have heard her introduction just a minute ago, but just to give you a bit more of a high level. She is director at Houston PR. She's worked in financial communications for the past 25 years. And she was a business journalist for more than a decade in Tokyo, and then at the Wall Street Journal in London. Since moving to communications 14 years ago, she's provided strategic counsel to boards and management teams on a broad range of listed and private, listed companies on reputation management, corporate messaging, positioning, and stakeholder communications. Today, she's going to be talking to you about developing a corporate narrative to support your growth ambitions. So what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over to you, Kay.
Thank you very much, Megan. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen with everybody now. Forgive me for jumping the gun earlier, but here is what I want to talk to you about tonight. So first of all, a couple of, just a little bit of an introduction to Houston, where Cath and I are both directors. Houston, we basically start from the premise that reputation matters, and it matters as a person, it matters as a business. And we deal with matters pertaining to your reputation, essentially. So basically, sorry, I'm just getting to grips with my mouse. So we work with leadership teams to transform communications. We help develop strategies that align stakeholder perception with commercial ambition. We help support your brand vision. So, I mean, this is true, whether I think this is true in terms of your reputation, whether you're just a small one-person business or whether you're a multi-location international or UK-wide business. Your reputation is obviously a very important currency, and this is what we do with our clients. And here, I just wanted to show you what we mean by stakeholders, because every business has many, many stakeholders. You know, first to start with, you have your brand, and that sits at the center of it, and then you have a range of stakeholders, including financial and investor, corporate customers and partners, consumers. You might need to engage with government and politicians, with your industry, and attract talented staff, and we'll come on to that in a moment. And there are various routes to do that. So what I'm going to talk to you about, as you know, as Megan's already said, is basically building out your corporate narrative, because you know, as was mentioned in Megan's introduction, and when I said earlier, I've been working in this world for some 25 years. I started out as a journalist when newspapers were the main source of information. Sounds like quite prehistoric concept now, but and the internet was dial-up only, so nobody used it very much. And actually, as a journalist in London, when I was at Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, I covered very much what was known as the convergence story, which was with technology, media, and telecoms coming together. And I watched as, for example, newspapers started to develop websites and then get into real-time news and so forth. And then, of course, we've seen smartphones, we've seen Twitter, we've seen Facebook, we've seen LinkedIn, we've seen all of those digital tools, which have basically made communications and news essentially very real-time and immediate. But underlying it all, I think one thing that's not changed is that it is fundamental that the content that you as a business are going to put out there, regardless of the channel, whether it's an old-fashioned newspaper, a leaflet at a conference, or on your website, or via your Twitter feed, that content has to be rock solid. And that's what I want to talk to you about, because that's the unchanging constant throughout all of this, getting your corporate narrative right. And so it feeds in effectively to all of your communications with all of your stakeholders. So if that makes sense. And just quickly, here's a quick sort of look at some of our clients. So you can see we work with a whole range of businesses. You've got Arco, which is a leader in PPE and safety, is one of our clients, and Yankee Candle, which you probably recognize, very consumer facing. We also work with Pressure Technologies, which is an industrial technology business. Fire Ranger, which is fire safety. Gresham House, which is actually a listed investor in sustainability assets. So a whole broad range, but again, you know, as I said, the fundamental principles obtain, which is you have to get that content right across all types of businesses. So why develop your corporate narrative? Essentially 4 key points here. You need to be able to, you want to basically add depth and breadth to the profile of your business. I mean, most companies have a website. It might have a bit of info about your products. You may have a bit about your people. But we live in a world where, you know, in 2021, consumers, customers, everybody is looking for more. I'm going to come on to that in a bit more detail soon. But the whole issue around environment, around diversity, around fairness of treatment of your employees, and your culture, your purpose, and your mission as a business is all important in the way you actually talk about who you are and what you do. And that will help you, of course, attract a talented group of ambitious staff who are drawn to your business. Particularly, I think if you're a small business, I think some of you have said that you want to stand out from the crowd by articulating your culture and making it a place they want to be part of. And also, if you're looking to grow the business, you might want to look at raising funding. Now, that could be through crowdfunding, that could be going to the city and talking to institutional investors, or it could actually be through just basically talking to some sort of family members with a bit of spare cash to persuade them to support you as you grow your business. Whatever it is, you still need to be able to sort of explain to them why it's a good idea to put their money into your business and how it's going to benefit them. So, and all of these various issues are made much more smooth and effective if you have a strong corporate narrative underpinning your activities there. So essentially, the very first thing that we always say, whether we're talking to a company that is just 2 people, 5 people, 20 people, 2,000 people, is what are your key messages? Developing your key messages. That typically, I would say, involves sitting down. And if it's just one of you, then sit down, make some time. If it's 2, 3, 4, 10 of you, sit down with the leadership team and talk amongst yourself. What are our key messages about our business? You know, what do we do? What's great about our products? What's great about us? Find some words that will encapsulate what kind of business you are. If you've only just started a few years ago, you could call yourselves innovative, ambitious, nimble, agile. You know, if you've been around for a long time, you're long established and have strong heritage. And then the next point here is to think about what's your elevator pitch. In other words, a brief description of who you are and what you do. And another way of looking at this is to think, okay, so I'm at a wedding and I'm sat next to my second cousin, who I rarely see, and they say to me, what do you do? What's the company you work for, and what do they do? How would you explain that to them in like the brief top line? You know, for example, if you say cybersecurity, Glenn, you mentioned, you might say, well, I work I'm a cybersecurity expert. If they go, oh, that's really interesting, I know someone that does that, you can take that then to the next level and discuss in more detail the nuances of what you do. But that elevator pitch, what's that brief top line description of your business? I did a quick look around at a couple of businesses that I know or have worked with in the past to see some good ones and some not so good ones. Because the point of this elevator pitch, this brief descriptor, you would then use that in any press releases you put out or in any kind of communications. You know, company X, which is the leading so-and-so, or a company that develops Y. So if we look at, for example, Auto Trader, we all know, they call themselves Auto Trader, comma, the UK's largest digital automotive marketplace, comma. Any press release from Auto Trader says that, if you look at their financial communications in particular. NCC Group, you may know this, some of you, it's a cybersecurity business. NCC, comma, this is, imagine if you will, a press release or some communication. The leading independent global cybersecurity and resilience advisor. I think that's a bit actually crowded, that one. They could lose a word or two, but they want to get a few messages in there. Here's one that's not so great as an example of how things can kind of go wrong if you try to cram too much in. I'm not going to name this company, but I did work with them. The leading provider of end-to-end cloud-based media services to the global entertainment industry. Now that could A, lose a few words, and B, you're none the wiser at the end of it as to what they actually do. They actually provide remote dubbing and translation services to the film industry, and they're actually quite exciting. But they wanted to get a lot of messaging in there and squashed it in, and arguably that's not as an effective way. But essentially, work out what is your brief descriptor about your business, and then you can also expand that to have a longer form notes to editors boilerplate paragraph. So any sort of press release communication and on your website, have that reflected, which might be 2 or 3 paragraphs. A lot of this you may already do. I'm aware of that, but I'm hopeful that I'm coming on to some techniques which will help you refresh, evolve, and develop these various kind of communication collaterals as we go through, if collaterals is indeed a plural word. So anyway, in essence, if you've got those in place, use them in all your internal communications. A good way to come at this actually is to do a SWOT analysis. They've been around forever, and they're probably the best way of approaching who you are as a business and what you would say about yourselves, and then just from that you can draft out who you are in brief and longer form. So the next thing I wanted to say is that, can you see that? Sorry. It's all about targeting the right audiences through your communications. Now here, I've used something as an example, which is it's something that you might that could be used by a full fibre broadband provider. The reason I chose it is there are about 50 of these at the moment rolling out full fibre broadband across the UK, so it seemed like a fairly sort of useful and hopefully helpful approach, because I appreciate all of your businesses are very different, people that join these groups. But if we look at, for example, the different audiences, you've got here your consumer, you've got your corporate partners and industry, you've got your financial and investors, government and politicians. I mean, no matter what type of business and what size of business you are, there may be a point at which you do wish to engage with government and politicians. So never discount that, particularly, for example, it could be local government, local planning laws are going to impact you. It could be around regulation of something that you're doing. It could be around VAT rates or all of that kind of thing. During COVID, I think a lot of smaller businesses had issues and would have wanted to engage with government around that. So, but if we go back to the consumer, I mean, some of you I know are B2B, but if you're targeting the consumer, you want to think about who your consumer targets are, what type of consumer is that? Or it could be a B2B customer, and again, what are the key messages, or who are you going for rather? And again, who would be your partners? Who in the industry do you want to know about you? Here we've got, for example, regional chambers of commerce as well. I suspect most people who are on this are alive to the idea of engaging also with other sort of Kent-based organisations like chambers of commerce that can help develop your business. And the point I made before about, you know, keeping your existing staff engaged and also attracting talent. And I think particularly maybe that could be an issue when you're based outside of London, to attract good talent that is happy to working in locally rather than traveling to London, and make sure that they don't take that route of, oh, I want to get the big job in London, but see you as a really fascinating and interesting company they want to be part of. And of course, there's trade media, and then financial investors, as I mentioned. It could be the big city institution. It could be, you know, a wealthy auntie who you want to ask them to support your growth by being an angel investor. So that's kind of thinking about your audiences and how to target them, and essentially, so sorry, I'm not good at this at all, as you can see. But let me move this, then I can see what I'm doing. But essentially the key messages will run through at the bottom here. You can see they're similar but different for each audience. So the messaging that you've done on the previous, that I talked about on the previous slide, then flows through into your various different audience communications. But it would be consistent across the piece, but with some emphasis in some areas for one and emphasis in other areas for a different type of audience. So that's generally where we're at. Now, here is a tool which I think is extremely helpful. I've used it to very good effect with any number of companies, large and small. So this is basically the investment case. Now, you may not be looking to raise cash, but nevertheless, I think it's a really good way to focus the mind is to, as I said, sit down, work out your messaging. And here's a technique for doing it. First of all, what are your company fundamentals? You know, if in terms of the company, are you as I said before, a long-established, highly regarded local business? Are you innovative and ambitious digital-first company? What are those fundamentals? And then what proof points can you offer? You know, if you're long established, and that's basically the attribute that you think is worth flagging, that, you know, set up in 1999, you know, X number of decades of great business, etc. And then what about your financials? You may not need to put this in the public domain, but it's worth thinking about, you know, what are your financials? Are you highly profitable? Are you sort of growing revenue year on year? Are you expanding exponentially? What are the proof points? And again, this is your own personal reference document. You know, what are your numbers? What do they look like? Is it sort of EBITDA growth of 10% consistently over the last 5 years? Is it revenue growth of slow but steady revenue growth, which in itself is a good thing, of 3% over the last 10 years? The leadership, what kind of leadership are you? Are you sort of highly experienced? Do you have a strong track record? Are you dynamic? And your products, what are your products? You know, what kind of products are they? Are they innovative? Are they well made? Are they award winning? Those kind of proof points around it as well. And the markets, what markets are you targeting? Are you targeting, if you're B2B, are you targeting SMEs? Are you targeting big corporates? And then some proof points of the type of customers you have. And finally, on this point is obviously your growth potential. Where do you see further growth? Because no business, as you know probably better than me, can ever stand still. You always need to be thinking about what's the next stage for your business. What's coming down the track that could disrupt you? But where are your potential growth markets? Might you look overseas? Might you look more broadly across the UK if you're quite locally focused at the moment? Might you look at expanding new verticals or developing the products you have into different markets that are adjacent so you can cross-sell and upsell? And proof points again of those that you can then use, and that will all feed into how you develop your messaging. Essentially, I appreciate you're all stretched for time, and this always becomes like the lowest priority, but I would advise, and I'll reiterate this at the end, to make a bit of time to do that and to actually get this in a document. So you've got the document that outlines your SWOT, your key messages, your investment case, your descriptor, and your boilerplate. And then whenever you need to do communications, whether it's been long planned or something that has to be a bit more sort of on the hoof and reactionary, then you've got that Bible essentially there. And obviously it's a dynamic thing because no business stands still and no business environment stands still. So it's something that you'd want to probably make time for every 6-12 months to review and refresh. So yeah, so that's the investment case. And then in terms of looking at articulating your culture and enhancing your credibility, this I think is something that applies to specifically the point I made earlier about the credibility of the company, attracting talent. If you're actually marketing, for example, to big corporates and you're a small company, you need that credibility visible on your website. So it's helpful to put on your website, if you don't have it already, a dedicated page that shows your details, your biographies, and so forth, and a picture. Some companies I've noticed will tend to do a fairly casual, you know, I'm Dave, I'm the CEO, I like jogging with my dog in the morning or something. I'm slightly more old school. I think there's a lot of value in actually being quite formal about that, because you're serious people, you want to be taken seriously. You can then sort of finish it off perhaps with something a little bit more funky, but make sure you get that credibility point in first. And then outline history of the business, which you can illustrate with a timeline. I mean, all businesses have an interesting story, whether they've been around for 6 weeks or 10 years or you know, many decades, I think, because there's the inception of the business, and you can start with when we had the idea, and you know, the garden shed story, which is always attractive. It's not always true, but you know, people usually come up with a business idea in an interesting way, and this whole entrepreneurialism angle is very, I think, interesting and engaging for a whole range of audiences. And then use that timeline to reinforce the key messages that you've agreed about yourselves, about your sort of being young and nimble, strong legacy, constantly evolving. So I wanted to show you actually a timeline that I thought was rather nice. It's Asda. We all know Asda. Asda's very big. It's been around a while, and they do something which is, I think, rather nice and sort of gives you immediately a feel for their culture. I'm going to see if this website comes up for me. Here we are. So Asda, as you know, and you know, most people have either shopped there or have one in their neighbourhood. They have a little bit here about the story of Asda and a quick paragraph, which is a sort of positioning piece. And then they were the first UK discounter, apparently, it says here. And then they've got some really nice kind of archive photos, which talk about, you know, their development from the 20s. And then they actually have a timeline which starts in 58 and takes you through what's happened over the years. It's not too busy. A couple of pictures, a little bit of info, and right through to the current day, which I think is a rather nice way of doing it. And I think any company, large or small, can do a little bit about that. And if you're not already, maybe this will give you some ideas about how you could maybe make it more interesting or engaging. And this keeps going, actually, as you can see. So, and right up until the current day, when they've obviously been acquired just recently. So that's quite a nice sort of timeline. I'm sort of conscious I'm running out of time, actually.
I was just going to say, yeah, just conscious of time, might have to skip a few of the examples.
Yeah. So, and Chapel Down's another one I'd send you to. Actually, Chapel Down's quite interesting as well, because Chapel Down, they did a crowdfunding initiative, and they also have a sort of listing on the Aquis Exchange. And so they do some quite nice things around what their investment case is as well, because they are looking to raise money explicitly, but they also do some nice about us. So I won't go into that. I did want to talk to you about this, which is ESG, which I flipped over, and I don't think I referenced earlier because I wanted to talk about it in more detail. ESG is a theme and a trend which has become increasingly prominent in our work, particularly with listed companies, but across all businesses, unlisted as well. Environmental, social, and governance. Essentially, This is all about consumer engagement, procurement departments of big corporates and small corporates, and public entities, you know, such as local government, etc., will all look for ESG credentials now before handing out contracts. And the ESG obviously means environmental, social, and governance. You may well have come across this. Most companies do some of it. So my first piece of advice is think about what do you do, because you're probably doing it without having actually flagged it and actually formalized it in a document. And then also think about what you can do. And then think about a roadmap about what you aspire to do. Make it realistic, but the key thing here is to have a roadmap and have an ambition, but to have a tangible roadmap with tangible milestones that is actually not just what's known as greenwash, as they call it these days, or ESG wash, but is actually a real thing. So, you know, environmental, you know, look at your lighting. Maybe you already use LED lighting everywhere. Maybe you recycle quite religiously, but you haven't really made a thing of it. You have the cycle to work scheme, maybe. Social could be apprenticeship schemes, staff development, diversity and equality, community engagement, all of those things. I don't want to just read off the slides, forgive me. Governance, I think, accreditations, best practice certificates, you know, staff training and their accreditations is all really, really useful. And then have specifically on your website, perhaps you could talk about that, our ESG positioning, or even, and I'm going to show you how others do it before just finishing with my reiteration here. So let me go here. This is how others do it. This is quite nice. Not this one, forgive me, I'm going to the wrong one. That's another issue. This is something actually I'll leave you with as a takeaway, to go away and look at the B Corp, which is a sort of essentially an accreditation that any kind of business can get that talks about their basically corporate responsibility. So let's get rid of that. Oops, forgive me. Showing you totally not what you want to see. Here, but what Able and Cole do, and you probably know Able and Cole, the veg box providers. They've got something very nice on their website, which I've hidden, which I'll pull up here. I'm so sorry. They have got something very nice on their website, but I've messed around with my screen somewhat. As you can see, I was a journalist for a long time, and the technology age has kind of overtaken me a little. But Able and Cole, basically, if you have time after this, go away and have a look, because I'm running out of time. Would like to hand over to Cath anyway. But what they do is they talk about people, planet, and purpose, and that's a very effective way of talking about your ESG positioning and what you believe in as a business, and how that flows through everything you do, including your staff, your customer engagement, and all of your communications as well. And that is the bedrock of what you do. So I think on that note, and I must apologize for losing my screen here, but hopefully I'll be able to bring it up later in the Q&A if anyone wants to see what I was talking about, but you know, hopefully will have made note of that. I'm actually going to hand back to Megan, because I'm conscious I'm using up your precious evening. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to taking any questions later.
Thanks, Kay. That's really good. Got sharing the screen.
I will. There we are.
Perfect. Thank you. So as we're running a little bit over, if we had just have a quick 5-minute break, kind of give you a chance to quickly go and grab a drink, nip to the loo, and then we'll pop back here. So about 20 past, we can start, and I'll hand over to Cath. Perfect. See you in 12. There we are, so welcome back. Now we're going to move on to Cath's presentation, where she'll be talking to you about how to plan an effective digital campaign. But first, a little bit of a background for those of you that might have missed her intro earlier. She is head of digital at Houston PR. She's a senior marketing professional with 15 years experience, but she did say 20 earlier, so I'm not sure which one's right, in digital marketing and insight agencies. During her career, she's worked with high-profile brands, as she mentioned earlier, O2, Facebook, and Google. And she's got experience in the full digital service, so working with clients to successfully plan and implement digital and social strategies in communication plans, which is where she slightly ties in with Kay's talk from earlier. So what I'll do now is I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to you, Cath.
Thank you. I think it's somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I think my bio might need a bit of updating with the years, but anyway, it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. And let's just set this to slide share. Can everyone see that? Yeah, got a thumbs up. Super. That's all I need. Great. So I'm not going to talk about Houston at all because Kay has done the job of introducing us and who we are. So I'm just going to kind of get stuck straight in, really. And I mean, Kay's talked to you a lot about building corporate messaging narrative, and my talk tonight is really to focus on, you know, how you take that a step further in terms of developing digital campaigns that reflect your core messaging. So some of you are business owners, some of you are in sort of freelancing, some of you might be working at agencies or in-house at brands, and really it doesn't, you know, that doesn't matter. You know, whether we're promoting our own brand or our own company, or whether we're working on behalf of someone, the inputs and the planning is very similar. So really, kind of, what does that mean? And this is one of my sort of favorite quotes here: by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. And it could not be more true in my eyes. Through the years of planning digital campaigns, you know, really have been caught out with ones that haven't had the level of insight and data and planning gone into them at the front end. And really, that's kind of where it all begins. And it's sort of taking time to make sure you've got the right inputs, understanding who your audience are, not just who your audience are, but where they are, how do they consume media, where will I find them, what channels and outputs and content and formats are going to resonate the most with them. What budgets have I got? You know, how should I phase my campaign? And I obviously can't touch on all of that today. I've only got 20 minutes, so I'm just going to touch on some of those key inputs, specifically around audience, channel, content, and a measurement, really, and optimizing your campaign. So sort of starting with the audience, and I'm sure you if you're got your own business, or if you're working with clients, or however it might be, you'd probably say to me, yes, I know my audience, I know exactly who my customer is, I know who they are, I know their profile, I know when they buy from us. And you really might have quite in-depth information on your customer profile, and I certainly would never challenge that at all. But what we find online really is that people can behave very differently. Quite often you don't know how people are behaving, or what people find interesting, where they're consuming media, and how they consume and how they consume. So ultimately, don't make any assumptions, because you don't, because yeah, you might get caught out. So at Houston, we adopt an audience first, or an audience-led strategy in planning our digital marketing campaigns. That basically means we use data and we use insight to be able to determine exactly where your audience are and how we're going to reach them. So there's plenty of different tactics and strategies in terms of how we do that, which I'm going to cover now. I need to lose my little box because I can't actually. There we go. I've managed to fly forward a slide. So yeah, okay. So like I said, lots of different ways to kind of actually identify who your audience is online. That some of it's data, some of it's targeting, and normally, where we kind of start, and it's a really good starting point, is with user personas. And I'm sure everyone's very familiar with what a user persona is, but essentially a fictional character or person that fills certain criteria, and you identify their pain points, who they are, how they behave, their interests, and you can build up a really rich persona of this person. It then helps you in your marketing to determine how to engage with them, or how to actually communicate with them. Personas are great, and there's definitely something that we use at Houston, and lots of our brands clients have them, but I do find that they can be limited. They can also be sometimes it's a bit too assumptuous as well, and you can find that they can categorize people when actually, again, it's not really data telling you how they're actually behaving. Actually, what are they doing? We might be able to see two people who look very similar but actually act very differently. So where, sort of moving on, the sort of second kind of key area where you can really think about who your sort of audience are, is what customer audience data already exists. So do you have a customer list, a CRM database, an audience that you interact with to send newsletters to? This can be a really good first party audience and data that you can use to target your campaigns against, and probably are your most valuable piece of audience data that you have. There's also third-party data, so platforms like Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, all of the data and audiences that they own, being able to access them. So when it comes to planning, Google have you build your audiences based on affinity audiences, so how people's behavior online. On Facebook, you can see how people engage with content, and obviously it's all anonymized, so you buy the audience rather than obviously contact details, so to speak. So first and third party data, really, really good. And it allows even first party data, you can build lookalikes of what your customer, a profile of what your customer looks like, and be able to target from that. So that's always one of the ways that we look at how to target new customers and audiences. It's also worth thinking about how warm your audience is, or are these people familiar with your brand? Are they cold to your brand? Do they know who you are? Have they had any relationship with you in the past? And a lot of the way we run our campaigns is actually kind of sort of traditional funnel type marketing, looking at people at the top of the funnel who potentially might be cold to your brand, and how to generate awareness with them, through to people who are much hotter, engage with you regularly. How do you retarget them and talk to them? But I'll go on to talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And the fourth kind of input is around, again, sort of third party, but things like social listening as well. So social listening tools can be quite helpful and quite surprising in terms of some of the data and some of the audiences and topics that you hear talking about. People are talking about your brand, but are also really nice input to, again, thinking about who the right person is to target, and also kind of the times and when, the time of day or season that they might be talking about your brand, for instance. I apologize, this slide looks a bit messy, and I wasn't able to build it, so if you just bear with me, I'm just going to walk you through it. But Kay touched a lot on what you're trying to communicate, and really, I suppose the way we're looking at it now, or the way I'm talking about it now, is much more in a kind of campaign led. So this isn't your kind of long-term strategy, this is tying into that long-term strategy, but what are your marketing objectives? It could be anything as simple as, I've got a webinar in a couple of weeks' time, I want to promote it. So how does that tie into your objectives? That would be a conversion objective. And then we're thinking about actually the KPIs that you need to measure that objective. And the KPIs are probably one of the most critical things to get right when you're measuring your digital campaign, because if you haven't got the KPIs right, then you're going to be measuring inaccurately, you're wasting money, you're not able to actually confidently say that whether your campaign has been successful or not. So I won't walk through all of these, but I think you sort of get the gist. Everyone knows our brand, but we're struggling with sales. You've got awareness, but you're actually trying to get people to consider your brand, or I've just launched a new product and I want everyone to know about it. So you're actually more top of the funnel awareness. So you know who your audience are, you know where they are, and now you are you've determined your KPIs, and now you're looking at actually kind of phasing and developing out a campaign strategy and plan. And I've kind of referenced the marketing funnel before, and I'm sure we're all very familiar with it. And I haven't used it because I suppose kind of how we think about planning our campaigns are very much this kind of awareness, objectives, consideration, direct response, but actually being aware that all of these different kind of points interlink, and customers can actually join you at any point, whether they're new customers to you or existing customers or well known. There's always a role to play, and I suppose that's kind of how we've tried to just sort of visualize it here for you. So thinking about the awareness and consideration objectives, so really building brand love and trust, and getting people to be inspired by your business and your brand and your content. And some of the channels that work really well for this kind of early stage kind of inspiration, aspirational messaging are all the social media channels, actually. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, very good at kind of high reach, mass awareness at quite a cost-effective platform to deliver against those objectives. Platforms like LinkedIn are equally are good at doing it, but they are much more expensive to run campaigns on. Snapchat actually is quite similar, and TikTok obviously still kind of early days, but it's there's a lot of awareness advertising you can do on there, less on the direct response side. As you sort of go further down the customer journey and you're trying to get people to actually convert, what we find is Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn being the best platforms for actually helping you to convert your customers into leads or sales or whatever it might be. I'm not saying the other channels don't play a role in it. It's just from the data and the insights and the campaigns that we run across consumer and B2B campaigns, we do find those to be the most effective platforms. Search and email very much play a role across the whole customer journey. It's just thinking about, again, your customer, what their mindset, what mindset are they in when they're searching at that initial stage. Perhaps they're thinking around, they know that they, need a digital agency. So that's a bad example. They know that they need a digital agency or sort of some digital marketing. So they might be searching around like how to find a digital marketing agency, or kind of what is. So those kind of more open terms, and it's thinking about your keyword strategy around kind of being a bit broader there. And as actually, again, as you go down the kind of customer journey and they start kind of doing their research, as they get to the kind of conversion stage in search, there's much more branded keyword searches. There might be more localized searches for your brand. So again, it's just getting in the mindset of the customer and thinking about your keyword strategy if you're running search campaigns. Similarly for email, we run a lot of email nurture campaigns. Very similar approach. It's if you've got a database and you've got customer lists, it's thinking that kind of early on you're trying to engage with that, you're trying to generate that interest. And then, you might have a sophisticated system like Marketo or HubSpot. You might be using MailChimp, whichever way it is, you can measure, you can look at the open rates, who's engaging, and then you start to send kind of follow-up emails and really try to nurture that sort of customer list or a database that you've got, and trying to get them, push them down to converting. So a few different examples of the types of channels that work across the different customer journey. Last point to mention on this is retargeting. So retargeting is absolutely critical across the whole customer journey, and this is really where you're able to again use data to understand who's visiting your website, who's engaging with your content on Facebook or social media, who's searching for you on Google, who's interacting with your emails, whatever it might be, and retargeting them. So and retargeting them through that journey, getting them to actually start to buy into your brand, seeing your brand, pushing them further down, giving them more things to engage with, more useful information, and ultimately then sort of driving them through to signing up, purchasing, doing a demo of your product, whatever that might be. So content, and I'm not going to talk too much about content because I think Kay really did that a huge amount of justice in terms of talking about content and how to translate that into sort of key messages. But some of the types of content that work really well at kind of building brand love and trust is kind of video content. So video content really, really great for delivering key messages in a visual, short, engaging manner. And we find pretty much any campaign we run, if we're trying to drive kind of awareness or a reach and sort of, like I say, building brand, then we find video is kind of one of the best ways to actually do that. Podcasts, obviously PR, writing blogs, creating landing pages for your campaigns can be all really nice sort of content and touch points at that early sort of awareness stage. Talking, kind of touching on that point about retargeting, you then might retarget someone with a white paper once they've engaged with your videos, or you might retarget them with some content around a webinar you're running, or you might run an influencer program where you engage with 5 influencers, for instance, who can then engage with their audiences around, specifics around testing your product, or essentially just trying to get people to engage and to start thinking about, sort of actually engaging and considering your product. And finally, in that conversion stage, it's all around kind of proof. So social proof, testimonials, actually video testimonials, all of that works really well at the kind of the sort of the final point of actually trying to keep people, getting people to convert and then retain, codes, trials, demos. And once you've got that content and you've thought about the different touch points, it's just considering context as well. So of course, all of those channels we've discussed, whether it's emailing people, whether it's interrupting people while they're scrolling mindlessly on Instagram or watching their stories, it's just thinking about why your audience are online. They're not online to be served ads to, they're not online to to necessarily engage in that way, but if you build content and advertising that can it fits into the surrounding environment, then you will have more success. And quite often clients come to us, B2B clients, and like, we absolutely could, no way, we're not advertising on places like Facebook. We just stand out. And I disagree. Your audience might well be on Facebook, but it's just thinking about the tone, the language, and not, and how you kind of position yourselves, and how you what your key messaging looks like, and just being aware of that, and not trying to jar too much. There's certainly a role for for brands to play and do very successfully. Finally, I don't know how I'm doing for time. About okay again, yeah, okay, great. So optimizing and constantly reviewing. So campaigns take time to build, and they definitely take time to learn. That most campaigns go into a learning phase. So whether you're running a campaign on, a search campaign or testing emails, or whether you're running a campaign on Facebook or LinkedIn, they'll take time to build, and you need to be patient and just make sure that you've got enough data to start actually looking at what's working, what isn't. Always test one variable at a time. So if you want to change the creative, or perhaps you change the messaging or the tone of the messaging, or whatever that might be, but just test one at a time so you can be confident that you are when you find what's working, what isn't, is that you can then hone it down to that variable that you changed. Test like for like. So age old, just if you're going to do an A/B test, make sure that you are testing you're not kind of looking at completely different channels and audiences, and you're trying to test them like for like. You've got to, if you're measuring stuff on Facebook, you will want to break out different audiences, different creative, and different messaging, and then you would do the similar on Google or your email, for example. So yes, I think that's kind of me wrapping things up. Don't throw your money away. Very, very, very easy to say. Campaigns are really, the way you build campaigns is by running them and learning and understanding the insights and the data that have helped previous campaigns to perform, to enable whether you should, where you should be testing for the future. So yeah, I think that is me done. And I don't know, Megan, now whether we're opening up for a Q&A, or is this the right moment to?
We are indeed.
Yeah.
So yeah, if anyone obviously has any questions, feel free to either kind of unmute yourself and ask them, or pop them in the chat. But I can kick it off. Right. I've been putting questions down whilst both of you have been doing the talk, so hopefully I can pick a good one.
I think I'm going to stop sharing, if that's
yeah, you can do.
If you want me to.
Yeah, you can do.
It's easier, and I can see everyone again.
Yeah, there we are. Right. Let me have a look at which question I'm going to go for. So I guess starting with you, Cath, if you don't mind, in terms of kind of small businesses, because quite a lot of kind of the people here have relatively small businesses, what advice would you give for kind of people wanting to start doing a little bit of a campaign or starting with some marketing? What kind of advice would you give for that if they're only just starting out?
Good question. Start small. And obviously what I've just I just saw a comment there saying there was a lot to take in, and you're absolutely right. It's a lot to kind of talk about in 20 minutes. And so my advice in terms of where to start, I mean, kind of back to Kay's point on if you've got a small business and you're thinking about kind of delivering your your brand, and you're communicating more, I would start with, what's that kind of initial thing that I want to do? Is it that I just want more people to know about us, or is it, okay, I've just got to start selling some product, and just hone in on that very, very precise objective. And from there, that will then help you to start thinking about, okay, let's now think about who I'm trying to reach. So, starting small, maybe you've got a customer list. Okay, fine, I've got a customer list. How can I start building out some content, some, an offer, something, a hook that's actually going to get them to engage. So, starting small. And then from a channel perspective, there's a lot of research you can do. I mean, small businesses, you can start by asking your customers. You can start by talking to them and asking them, what platforms are they using. That can always be a good place to start if you're really starting off small. But I think that's a good place to start. Just kind of stick to one objective. Don't, you know, really don't try to do too much. Don't think, right, okay, I want them to know who we are, but I also need to get to sell to them as well. You know, you do want to sell to them, and I'm sure that's everyone's ultimate objective, but if they don't know who you are, then you've got to do that initial piece around driving awareness, because then that will help you in the long run build out, you know, a kind of a better customer relationship and better customer engagement plan.
Cool. That was perfect. Thank you. One for you, Kay. Obviously, you obviously messaging. You said about varying the messaging depending on which type of audience.
Yeah.
Would you recommend? Obviously, I know some businesses might only have kind of one audience, or they might have several, depending on what the business does and what kind of services they provide. But in terms of a content kind of point of view, how much would you vary your message for each type of audience? Is it better to have kind of a similar message but slightly varied in terms of the tone or the way you say it or the way you visualize it in terms of graphics and whatever, or kind of keep them quite different?
I think that's an incredibly good question. Thank you. And it kind of comes back to a fundamental point that I think I talked about a whole range of audiences, but the fundamentally key three audiences are your customers, your staff, and your shareholders. Now, your shareholders might be you, in which case you can ignore that a bit, but quite often you'll have, if you're a small or a large business, you'll have, you know, people investing in your business. But beyond that, of course, there are those other audiences that I referred to, which could be the industry you operate in, and it could be government, local government, national government, media, etc., investors. Potential investors, I mean. But I think the point is that the tools that I was talking about, for example, the messaging, the investment case, using that as a messaging tool is quite useful, because first of all, you have to pin down what are the fundamentals about your company, and then you have to evidence it, and there might be various different points. So a message could be that, you know, you're highly profitable. You have very engaged staff, and you're incredibly hardworking. Now, you may not want to keep telling the staff how profitable you are, because they might want to start asking you for a pay rise. But you might talk more about how engaged they are and how you recognise that they're hardworking. So it's about prioritising the messages. And I mean, I sort of, that was slightly flippant, but just to sort of demonstrate a proof point. So for investors, for example, you talk about your margin, but customers don't necessarily want to know that you're making a lot of profit out of them. So for customers, you talk about more prioritize the quality of your product. Now, again, I mean, customers, however, I have heard that customers do want to understand that a business is making enough profit to keep going, because they want it to remain in business, especially, I mean, not especially B2B, anyone. You want to know that the company you're buying from is not cutting its prices so low that it's putting itself out of business, because that doesn't bode well for a long-term relationship. So it's a balancing act, really, about understanding those audiences and then prioritizing certain messages to some and certain messages to others. But the main fundamental point is the messages should, there should be a bedrock of key messaging that runs through the whole of your communications to all audience. You can't say one thing to one lot and something sort of slightly different or to another. It has to be, if you're talking about profitability, you can't then pretend to your staff that you're not very profitable, because, you know, that way lies disaster and basically destroys trust. And obviously trust is crucial here. So hopefully that helps sort of elucidate on that a bit more. But it really is around this sort of prioritizing of the messaging sort of hierarchy, to use a slightly technical word. I think the other thing that I would say is that you can tier your messaging, and I slightly alluded to that as well. And I said, if you're sat at a wedding next to your second cousin you haven't seen for 5 years, and they say, what do you do now? You'll start with the top line, you know, say, yeah, I work in PR and comms, and they go, oh, interesting. And then they might go, oh, that's interesting. We work with X company. That's where you can go, oh, well, we work with this type of business and we do this. And, and then they can go, oh, well, PR is sort of slightly commoditized nowadays, isn't it? And then you go, no, it's not actually. And this is how we're highly integrated. We make sure our customers, the perceptions are aligned with their ambitions and so forth. And so you have a sort of tiering of how you talk about yourself, and that again will change according to the audience that you're talking to. So hopefully that covers that off to some extent.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Is that okay? I can't find a little hand to put up to ask a question.
I did see you put your mute off, so yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm interested in the separation, or not the separation, the integration, but the division between marketing and PR. And particularly for my students, we tend to sort of compartmentalize, modules. So we do PR here, we do marketing here, and, various subsets of all those things. But at the same time, we say to the students, it's got to be all integrated, even though we sort of try and make some judgments about separation. What's your view on that? How would you work with marketing? Do you see this as a seamless sort of PR marketing is all in one? Do you see it as being completely, that's really, I'm just interested in your views and perhaps the views of the rest of the panel, because, I'd see it discussed quite a bit.
I mean, I suppose kind of quite a simplistic way to look at it from my perspective is that who we work with as an agency, as a communications agency, is very typically, particularly from my perspective, is the marketing team. So, we are engaging with the marketing team to help them, with their comms and messaging, and PR kind of fits within that, whether it's PR, whether it's digital marketing, whether it's content marketing, whatever that might be. It kind of all encompasses each of those different elements. So kind of actually very similar to what you said, it is an integration of marketing. And I don't know, Kay, you might have a different sort of view on kind of how the PR element fits in, but
no, very much of the same view, actually. I think, typically I have been working with businesses who are sort of generally city facing in some way, looking at targeting institutional investors even when they're unlisted, but nevertheless, I tend to, my main contacts tend to be the chief executive and the finance director, and working out their investment case messaging and so on. And the reason I use that today actually as a tool is that I'm, also a key part of communications is to be very closely aligned with the marketing team. So, the investment case and the marketing narrative have to very much fit together and reinforce each other. So I think Marcoms, I think I've seen it evolve. At one point, it was just the marketing person, the comms person. Now Marcoms are all part of the same story. With some of our clients, we do actually do both. We work with the C-suite, the CEO, FD, and also the marketing team, and we have joint calls and separate calls. But what they're saying at the kind of corporate level about the business and its growth will also feed through to the marketing communications and where the priorities need to go. I think, as Cath was saying, what you need to sell right now and how that fits into the bigger picture corporate strategy. They all need to be part of a whole. And then what you say about it all needs to be consistent. You might kind of modify the language depending on the audience, but typically maybe not. Typically I think it's prioritizing, as I was saying earlier, but Marcoms is very much here to stay, and to separate them, I think is kind of unhelpful actually, because you sort of see, sorry if you're doing that, but I think it's important to, probably it's worth teaching them separately and then probably talking about how they integrate and how important it is that they do. And the old days of, I think it used to be sort of earned media versus sort of marketing, but of course now there's a lot of paid for as well in terms of comms and PR and positioning. So those distinctions are being blurred somewhat, but it always comes back to aligning the messaging so that the marketing narrative is aligning with the corporate strategy and what they're saying at that level of the business.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anyone else got any more questions?
Actually, one short question. It's much more tactical and operational. When you're targeting customers sort of internationally, do you find that you can get fairly robust data through buying sort of customer data that you mentioned before, or is it a bit more? Is it more prone to variability in terms of accuracy? I don't know through any of the sort of social media platforms you were talking about.
Yeah, no, good question. I think any third-party data is certainly kind of open to a lot of inaccuracies or just being slightly more just not being as targeted as you would hope. So I certainly would always kind of have that as a consideration. I don't necessarily think that would be internationally or based in the UK. I think any third-party data you buy has the kind of tendency to be kind of more inaccurate. So I wouldn't necessarily say it was like that. I mean, we use certain tools like TGI or YouGov where you can actually understand kind of people's behaviors, and then but if you're buying them off platforms like Facebook, or well, not buying them, but buying against audiences on Facebook or Google, then actually I would say that they're pretty accurate because they're based on data and they're based on behavior. So that's their proprietary data, and that's what helps them sell so much advertising, because ultimately they know so much about people, and that's why it makes it so effective. I mean, the levels that we can target on Facebook and the accuracy and the response you get on cold audiences sometimes really blows my mind, because actually you kind of realize that you really are tapping into people who genuinely you're tapping into moments, life events that they generally are experiencing and are in market for. So I think I don't know if that helps to answer your question, but it's it can be very effective.
Brilliant, thank you.
I've got a question, if it's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's about data and about how you learn. So where do you learn about how to kind of gather that data, how to ask in the right way, what you're looking for? Is there a, not an easy way, but an effective, is there a place to go if you want to learn that sort of thing?
Do you mean kind of broadly around how to build sort of data sets of audience, or do you mean?
Yeah, well, it's about where do you look? So when you're talking about Facebook and other sort of social platforms, how do you access that? What would you be looking for?
Understood. So there's multiple different ways of doing it. So you can do it directly on the platforms. So if you wanted to run a Facebook campaign, as long as you've got a business page, anyone can run a Facebook campaign. And once you get onto the platform, you can then start to build audiences based on their insights. Really, they used to call it audience insights. That doesn't actually exist now, but it's all built into their sort of back end platform that any advertiser, small business, large corporate has access to. And this is kind of what I was alluding to in terms of if you kind of know who your customer is, and you can search and pull together data based on demographics. You can pull data based on interests. So people who follow other pages, people who engage with content around, I don't know, getting married or having a baby, and all of that. I mean, it's very, it kind of can start very, very sort of simplistic, like I want to target you know, 18 to 35-year-old females that are, I don't know, you know, getting married and whatever, wedding business, for instance. But then you could go into so much more depth around actual publications, media sites that they follow, like I say, life events, moments, like, I don't know, weather targeting. There's so much, so many kind of components to it. But at its most simplest, it's kind of demographic, it's behavior, it's interest level. And they capture all that. So Facebook, you know, they know what you're talking about on WhatsApp, for instance. So you know, and I'm sure everyone's had experiences when they've been chatting on WhatsApp, and then you go onto Facebook or, you know, Instagram, and then suddenly you're served an ad about something that possibly, you know, you don't even remember talking about, because someone else on a WhatsApp group's talking about it. And you know, it really is, and that's the kind of thing you don't have sight of, but you can put in an input to say you want people who are, you know, interested in X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense? Sorry,
it does. I think because I've never, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I've never really engaged with it properly, so it's like anything else, you know, until you engage with it, you've got no hope of understanding it. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, you know, it's a bit of I would say it's a dark art, but I mean, we have people in our team who kind of specialised at actually kind of building audiences and data and data targeting, because it's you know, it is there's quite a lot of breadth, but also being quite specific to make sure that you aren't wasting your money and you are finding the right people, kind of.
Yeah, and I think that's the problem that we've had is figuring out who those right people are.
Right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but yeah, and it's a key thing to work on, and to make sure you've got that before, I'd say, you started to sort of start running campaigns and starting to build audiences on, you know, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or Google, wherever it might be.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Cool. Has anyone else got any questions? No? Cool. Well, I will pop my screen back up. Should be able to see my screen now. So each event we ask for kind of your feedback. We have actually tweaked the format of the survey slightly, so it's a bit more tailored around each event. So we ask you feedback, kind of, what did you enjoy about the event? What are you going to take away from the talks? Things like that. So what I'll do is actually, I'll quickly stop sharing my screen. I'll pop the link into the chat. So if you could kind of fill that out, it would be really helpful for us, because we can use that feedback to then keep improving our events as we go along. So that's in the chat for you guys. And then I'm going to talk to you about our next meetup. So our next one is on Wednesday, the 21st of October, and we're going to be talking SEO for some people, so search engine optimization. We have a talk from Mike Alexander from Tangible Digital, so he's going to be talking about SEO, around like general SEO, and kind of filling you in on that topic. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a Q&A panel session with so Chris Surridge and Kieran Oliver will be joining Mike on the panel, so we can get that conversation started around SEO, similar to how the Q&A session works here, but it's a bit more involved because it's a panel and it's a little bit longer, so everyone can kind of get the discussions that they want out of them. So, but you can register on our meetup page as normal, and we've also been putting them on Eventbrite as well, so there's a different way to kind of reach out to people. We are hoping to potentially run that one in person, but we'll keep you updated if we do, just in case, because obviously, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of different things you need to take into account now running an event in person, just because of COVID and the different rules. And then you've also got our other two kind of branches of meetups. You've got the Maidstone branch and you've got the Medway branch. So Maidstone, I believe they're still hosting it online, but their next one's going to be the 15th of September. and they're going to be announcing their speakers and themes soon. And Clockwork Moggy, who ran the Medway one, they've actually gone back to live events, and they had a really good turnout for their one a couple of weeks ago. And they'll also be kind of releasing their theme soon, but their next one's on the 6th of October, if you fancied going along and kind of giving that one a try as well. So that is all of the details. What I'll do is I'll stop recording now. So thank you all for coming.